Love your suit.
Hello, beautiful people. I am Oliver Perrin, and welcome to A Safer Space. I'm speaking today with Mr. Tim Rudisil, the man from high atop a mountain, coming at us from East Tennessee, and I am very happy it is so. The subject of our discussion this afternoon will be commies among us. But before we get to that, which will be in just a moment, let me enjoin you to subscribe to this channel, A Safer Space. As many of you know, I am in the doghouse with YouTube. I have several content strikes, and I have to wait for them to expire before I can begin to post content to the Semiagog channel again. So please subscribe to A Safer Space. Please subscribe to Semiagog. Please stay subscribed to Semiagog. Also, I would love to know in the comment section how many of you are new subscribers who found me through the Safer Space channel, and how many of you have come over from Semiagog. If you're new and you discovered me and Tim as well through A Safer Space, please let me know in the comments. I'm interested to find out how much exposure I'm getting with the YouTube algorithms. We all know that quite a bit is being done to stifle alternative voices on social media platforms, so I'm curious about that. So please subscribe to A Safer Space. Please stay subscribed to Semiagog. Please click the bell for notifications for both channels. I'm also available. Both channels have a backup analog on BitChute under the same names, and I'm on Gab, Minds, and Twitter. So, and on Tim's behalf, I should mention that there is a Patreon for this channel for those of you who are interested. Now, the subject of our discussion is this idea of commies among us. And for this particular clip, the focus will be on
which you may have noticed that, thanks to Ollie, I'm not one of them.
Yeah, Tim's probably not a commie. Not a commie.
I'm not a commie. I believe in Patreon.
Right. I also think you probably have a boot jack that has had the bloody remains of communists scraped off onto it on a number of occasions. Let's say it metaphorically.
This is a safer space, Ollie.
Absolutely it is. Absolutely it is. You're quite right. Shame on me. So I'm reading...
Move over, little dog, cause big dogs move in.
Oh, yeah, Hank Williams Sr.
That's our boy.
I had come across an interview online on Stefan Molyneux's channel where he was talking to a woman named Diana West. And they discussed this book that she has written called American Betrayal. That's by Diana West, also the author of Death of the Grown-Up. The subtitle is The Secret Assault on Our Nation's Character. And what's really interesting about this book for me is that she's one of these people who will leave no stone unturned. And from what I've read of the book, I'm only, 100 pages into it at this point, but it is really striking how much evidence she has uncovered that we have been riddled with communists from at least the 1930s. And my suspicion is that that process began right after World War I. So for much more time than even that. She brings up all kinds of interesting points, like the fact that with the so-called Lend-Lease program, where we talk about sending stuff across the Atlantic in ships, and the German submarines, sank so many, and yeah, we also gave some trucks to the Soviets. Well, it looks like we prioritized sending equipment, material to the Soviets, to the point where we did not provide fighter planes that we had manufactured to Singapore, and so Singapore fell with significant strategic implications, great loss of life, sending British troops, fleeing from the area. We did not resupply MacArthur in the Pacific. We had issues with Corregidor and stuff going on in the Philippines that eventually, if I'm not mistaken, led to things like the Bataan Death March. We did not just give the Soviets trucks. We put together whole factories and sent them over so they could reassemble them. We provided them with a navy. We provided them with aircraft. We provided them with medicine, with socks, with tires, with everything you can possibly imagine. Millions and millions of firearms, rounds of ammunition, all provided to prop up the Soviet state so that they would not fall to the Germans. And, you know, you get stuff like Alger Hiss and McCarthy and, you know, the Red Scare, as they call it. But she goes into other things, like after the quote-unquote fall of the Soviet Union, or during its beginning after the Berlin Wall fell, meetings between Bush Sr. and Gorbachev, where Bush Sr. is basically going out of his way to treat these communists nicely and invite them into the world of these developed nations based on some sense of shared values. And, you know, indeed, it continues to the present where, you know, ever since Bill Clinton was president, Hillary Clinton had been pushing this national health care notion in order to nationalize the healthcare system. You know, whatever bullshit on the surface she said about it doesn't matter. That was her aim. And it had been for quite some time. So when Barack Obama came along, he just basically picked up the Hillary program, even though she hadn't become president. He's known for saying things like, you know, directly saying, I think things will, you know, be better for everyone if we spread the wealth around. And I'm not sure if there's a more archetypal socialist / communist statement. So these examples can be easily multiplied. I don't want to get too long-winded in the opening, but I wanted to touch on some of the evidence out there for how much that we think of ourselves as enemies of the Soviets, or did once upon a time. We've been doing everything possible to prop them up and support them and help them and take our treasure and send it to them. And so the question is, how riddled with commies have we been? How riddled with commies are we? And what are the implications of this? What is the significance of this for our country? You know, we're seeing more and more Antifa coming out, you know, people with black masks and, you know, waving red flags and hammers and sickles. And now we've got, you know, quote unquote social democrats or democratic socialists, whatever the fuck they are, unwelcome in my eyes. So with this as a background, I imagine you did not see a whole lot going on with FDR, given that you're not quite old enough for that. But you did see the upheaval of the 60s, and you have been a careful observer of communist manipulations for quite some time, Mr. Tim. So I want to ask your thoughts on this. The very last thing I want to say first, however, is that we're planning to do this clip, which is Commies Among Us. And it seems necessary at the outset to do a second clip, which we will probably be doing right after this one, which is Commies Around the World. You know, so we're starting with the idea of what they're doing here in the U.S. And have been doing here and probably will be doing here, but we'll move to a global picture subsequently. And we're just dividing these things in order to get the conversation into workable units, bite-sized chunks for us all to consider. So that's it for my long-winded introduction, Mr. Tim. How would you walk us down the road of this full picture of red manipulation in the United States, which must have begun shortly after World War I, and certainly continues to this day? How can we view it? How can we see it? How can we understand it? What do we need to be aware of?
Well, the main thing is that everybody and his brother after World War I was tired of war. Absolutely bloody fucking tired of it. The Brits wanted to go in and put the Tsar back on the throne. They found out because of the communists and socialists that not a ship would move, not a man would move, not a train would move in all of the United Kingdom if they tried, because they did try, and they were told, no, we're not doing it.
So you had the public backlash, the pressure not to deploy troops abroad.
Public.
Well, that's the public aspect, because there was very much the idea. But then there was the private aspect you're pointing out, which is sabotage and subversion from unions and workers who sympathized with their ideology.
Workers of the world unite. Yes, we have nothing to lose but your chains, as I understand it. The
Is that the
thing
last
is, this,
page of the Communist Manifesto? Somewhere in there?
there you are. You have to understand that the public does not enter into these negotiations at all. That's where people make their mistake. They keep thinking that Antifa, just like the old workers nonsense, represents somebody. It doesn't. It represents the people who are paying to have this done. Now that's where you have to look. Always follow the money, Oliver. I will give you an example. Perfect. Today's example. The price of gold today is about $1,215 an ounce. Not long ago, it was $1,263 an ounce. And yet both India and China are buying it like going out of business. Now, why is that, do you think?
My impression, and I am certainly no particularly knowledgeable person about economics or finance in any way. I make no claims. But my just immediate impression with my surface familiarity with everything is that they're trying to shore up their financial institutions against currency manipulations, things like the petrodollar and the rest, and that by having gold in the reserve, they create options for themselves that they otherwise would not
Yes,
have.
but when you buy gold, it tends to make the price internationally go up, does it not?
Right, so you can create your own bubbles.
But it has gone down by 50 some odd dollars the ounce. Well worth consideration. You watch where the pebbles are placed, my good friend Ollie.
Yes, but the fundamental point is about who pays for it and what's going on. Are there examples from early on after World War One, or are there examples from the period with FDR, who seems a dubious figure now, looking retrospectively back?
FDR did remove gold from the common ownership. Oh yes, he did. He outlawed gold. It was amusing.
What do you mean outlawed gold?
If you were a standard U.S. citizen, you could not own gold coins. You could not buy and sell gold coins if you were a standard U.S. citizen. It was against the law for you to have gold in your possession.
But can you help me understand how this fits into Commies Among Us and ask who pays for it?
Stop and think, Oliver. What does gold have that nothing else has?
It's a baseline standard of exchange.
Intrinsic value.
Yes.
And they wanted to go to credit.
Right, fiat currency.
Uh-huh.
Which gives you every kind of room under the sun to play games. People like Soros in particular.
Really?
So it would seem.
Well, what you had a generation of people who did not want any more to do with the world at large. These were the French, American, British, etc., who were the, shall we say, officer class. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. They were the bubble people of their time. And just like the bubble people in today, they did not care that their decadence, their form of a political theory, if you will, would mean that many, many people would die. They really didn't give a damn. They really did not care. Now, these people were the useful idiots, not to be confused with the extraordinarily well-versed idiots who had studied Marxism and communism and who thought it was the way to go. Stop and think. We had a number of people in authority at Harvard, Princeton, Yale, all the universities round and about in this country. We had a number of them in England, and a lot of them were communist.
Well, it seems that their program has always entailed taking over educational institutions. Like they identified that very early on as a wellspring of cultural development, where they could tie the string, I should say, where they could tie the string around the branch of the bonsai and slowly begin to torque it down.
Well, according to Kim Phillips, they didn't have to torque it very far. But at any rate,
Kim Phillips.
Never mind, Ollie. He was a Brit. He was a Brit. He was one of the great three. But be all that as it may be, he came after World War II. You had all of these people involved in basically wandering around Europe and America doing their nationalist retrenchments, their version of isolationism. At the same time, the communists were all for them. They wanted them to retrench. They wanted them to fall back.
Why? Because that's precisely the moment when the communists, as a part of their fundamental doctrine, were attempting to expand globally by agitating class divisions around the world.
My goodness, you don't suppose?
So for us to stop being involved at that point made perfect sense, because then they'd have a free reign upon the board.
Well, there's that. There's also the thing of crashing economies. You see, as soon as credit came in, economies started to crash.
Yes, they did. I mean, basically, you couldn't have had FDR as the historical figure, if you will, that he was, unless you were dealing with the Great Depression and everything else. And there's quite a bit of stuff that's been published to show that that was engineered in order to create his opening and opportunity.
Well, there you are.
And same things with Weimar Republic and German Depression.
You don't suppose that's why our friend decided not to buy out the stock market again, do you? When it started to crash?
Our friend.
Yes, J.P. Morgan. He's famous for having said, "I will not do this again." He put together a consortium of his friends, to buy up the market when it started to fall. Otherwise, the stock market would have fallen about, 6 months to a year ahead of when it did. You'd have had the great stock market crash of 28 instead of 29.
And of course, look what Obama came in on.
Yes, look at him.
And what they've done with the housing crisis. And I fear that we're getting too much over here into commies around the world, but there's a certain amount of overlap between these two topics of discussion that we can't avoid. But
we haven't really taken in the commies here yet, because the commies here have a big influence on commies around the world.
Everywhere. Yes, I did just want to note, though, as has been mentioned in previous clips, there's Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds, which is an old book. I think it's 19th century from Britain, if not early 20th century. I think it's 19th century. But basically, they review... No, you're thinking of The Crowd. This one is an earlier one that discusses things like the South Sea bubble, the tulip craze. So basically, you can see that everything that we're dealing with, people like to go back to 1848, but you can easily go back to the French Revolution and the manipulations of the merchant classes. And by this, I'm not trying to say in some cryptic way Jews, though Jews played a role in it as well. I'm talking about merchant classes, not using a dog whistle term. And their manipulations, I think, were central to bringing down the Catholic powers in France, because France had been giving them so much trouble in the Low Countries, so much trouble, with the Restoration, and then after the Revolution in England, they wanted to bring a new monarch in from abroad and straighten all this out, but that required getting rid of the Catholic powers of France. Much like, later, these same merchant princes had to get rid of the imperial powers of Russia. So you can see the same program being used going back all the way to the end of the 18th century.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Which leads one to wonder about the nature of revolutionaries.
Well,
as opposed to simply revolution.
The revolutionaries, from everything I could see, it looks to me like they were useful idiots and, a few manipulators who were higher up the food chain and the rest. But the French Revolution seemed to have been a manufactured event as well, as I kind of touched upon in my poem, The Church of State,
Indeed you did.
And what is it? A tisket, a tasket, a head in a basket. It cannot respond to questions that you ask it.
Yes. I do enjoy that little piece of doggerel. Yes, indeed. They did some experiments to find out whether or not a head could respond to questions that you asked it. Found out it had to have the lungs to move the air.
But it could blink in response for a short period of time.
It could blink, yes. It could blink in response. And did. Very successfully. Ah, well.
So back to how we here in our country have a sort of a central role in making these things happen abroad. Probably traceable to the points at which the Dutch and British East India companies began to set up other places to be. These were trading entrepôts like Singapore or, on the Horn of Africa, the great entrepôts, things like Hong Kong, and very much things like New Amsterdam, which then became New York. And as many people are not aware, the American flag that we use today, with tiny modifications like star placement and their number, the American flag of our United States is the flag of the British East India Company, period. That's what it is. And so the ability of the Western powers, the banking groups in London like Lloyd's and shipping insurance and the great banking houses, they eventually set up in places like New York instead and have been wielding their influence from there instead of classically from places like Paris and London and Amsterdam, where once upon a time they did.
Yes. The problem gets to be with these people that they seldom can take the long view. You see, that's the problem.
But they seem to take a longer view than everyone else that they manipulate.
Well, now you're talking about the communists now. I'm not. I'm talking about people like the banking houses. They have gotten notoriously short-sighted recently. The traders, both bond and other sorts, on the markets are very short-sighted. They're looking at what kind of a bonus can I get this year?
You can see that built structurally into their approach to everything with the idea of a 3 to 5 year exit strategy. You never hear about an exit strategy that isn't locked in within 3 to 5 years. And you'll very often see that the CEOs brought in tasked with dealing with things like increasing shareholder value. This I know from having worked with the C-suite in order to meet some goal that they have. They're similarly constrained by a window of like 3 to 5 years, because if you're lucky, that's how long they're going to be there. Though very often you'll see CEOs, in particular other ones like COOs and CMOs, operating officers, marketing officers, and the rest, they'll be swapped out even more quickly. Some of the clients I worked with, you'll see them disappear 6 months in. So
But they reappear somewhere else, do they not?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
What is that? Musical chairs, is it? Something like that. Yeah, that's the size of it, Oliver. And one wonders how it is that such things are manipulated, because they are manipulated. If you look to the Wharton School of Business, you find very readily, it used to be that news would appear in the Wharton School of Business Review, and the Harvard Business Review not so much, but the Wharton School of Business Review, and about 5 years later it would appear on the world stage. This to me is ridiculous, because to be honest with you, it was decided by the class that decides such things, which is usually an educational class, that communism was the way to go. It is not, by the way, but it was the way to go. And everything is filtered through the lens of socialism and communism, and its opposite, laissez-faire capitalism.
And for much of the historical period we're talking about, I think it's prior to Khrushchev, nothing had come out about the horrors and inadequacies and failures of this doctrine. So for quite some time, people were free to say, the situation has not been decided. We don't have enough evidence yet. It could very well be that communism would be this wonderful future, as though somehow people were not aware of the reality of things like the Holodomor, the starvation and famine and death in the Ukraine and the rest.
Well, people weren't, because they were not given the knowledge that necessitates this kind of decision. They were merely kept in the dark. And like anything kept in the dark and fed shit, what do you expect of it? Mushrooms. This is nonsense, Oliver.
And so the decisions are being made by this class.
Mm-hmm.
And they're being made in advance, which shows top-down machinations.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I want to return to that point since I cut you off there.
Oh, that's all right. And what you have people that were behind Joseph Stalin, that were behind Lenin, who were feeding Lenin and Stalin information to feed to the public at large. These people divided, I should say, into a couple of sets. One of the sets that we don't hear anything about anymore is the Communist Internationale, which was responsible for recruiting people in the United States and the United Kingdom. People come out and go, oh, the communists got, Philby and so on.
And that would have been the post-World War I and particularly post-World War II. Like the Internationale was blowing and going as a major communist force doing this stuff at least up through the 50s, was it not?
Unless one is willing to take a look at it today, yes.
Well,
it's still going strong today.
So we're here, though, we're distinguishing specific groups within this larger set. And so we can identify the Internationale as a globalist variant of it, and it continues to operate to this day.
Mm-hmm. Yes. The actual Internationale, not just the one that people wandered around and put on badges about.
Sing their songs, yes.
Mm-hmm, yeah. What you have are people who are dedicated to the concept of bringing everyone to a state of absolute socialist euphoria, where they can be themselves and be all of these wonderful things that they can be, and where money matters not.
Right. It's a typical sort of apocalyptic religious framework. And I've often
very much a religious framework.
Imagined that communism is what you get when you manipulate the religious instinct post-emergence of secularism. So really what we're dealing with here is if you
Lovely.
get
I
rid of
like that.
God and soul, then what you get is, it goes straight down to, the Hegelian shit that Marx manipulated, where he said he's going to turn the dialectic on its head. It's dialectical materialism rather than this idea of how ideas and
Promise them
philosophies.
anything but give them our page. Yes, indeed.
And yet it's still fundamentally a manipulation of religious instinct, which is why it has to have an unattainable end state in some other realm in which everyone will undergo a form of salvation. Yet in this case, it's one that's materialistic.
Yes. Now, how do you get hard-boiled economists to agree to that?
It's a good question.
Yes, it is, isn't it? How do you do that, Oliver?
Well, there's always coming up to them and saying, there's always time to talk. That's real simple. Either do what I say or, you'll slip in the tub.
Could it be that you do not take the hard-boiled economist and do that with them? Could it be that you take some soft-boiled popularizer of these things and do it with him instead? Is he not more apt to go along with you?
Well, yes, the gullible are eminently manipulable.
Gullible. Reminds me of Gulliver. I wonder why that is. Something about little tiny strings tying down a giant. But at any rate, the thing is that FDR and his boys were given a situation in the United States custom made for them. And I mean that literally, custom made for them. There's even a song that was sung by a group called, I believe it's Alabama, that deals with Mr. Roosevelt. Gonna save us all. Oh, yeah. Let's see. Mama got sick and Daddy got down. They sold the farm and they moved to town. Daddy got a job with the TVA, bought a washing machine and then a Chevrolet. Yeah. Try to get a rich man to vote like that. I believe it's Alabama.
But they're 60s and 70s, so they're retrospectively singing about New Deal developments or what?
Yeah. Sure. You see, the New Deal is with us still. This is from the 30s, and this is the next century, and we still have the New Deal. And we still have New Deal economists who are out there propounding what, to my mind, is communist rhetoric. It's at least socialist, if not communist rhetoric. So I do not see the difference in them. I see them very much in the same way that I view these talking heads, these pundits of the economy who come on, and some of them are on NBC and MSNBC, and some of them are on Fox. And they're talking as though they know what they're talking about. They don't. They come out with these sound bites, just like they used to in the newspapers. And the sound bites are basically worthless.
Yeah, and they reek of communism at every turn. You've got the obvious shit like Ocasio-Cortez.
Communism, laissez-faire capitalism, it really doesn't matter.
But you've also got it with the new parties they're trying to create. Like Democrats are trying to shape themselves along the lines of the democratic socialists. They're also, what's that thing that Cenk Uygur and the Young Turks were involved with for some time, the social justice Democrats. They basically, they're attempting to push socialism as hard as they can. Is there any way that it can be avoided here, or is this just a fait accompli? We're screwed?
Yes, by laughing at it. By laughing at it. And giving it exactly the attention it deserves. by asking the question, okay, let's say we did that. What do we wind up with? What do we wind up with if we do this wonderful thing that you espouse?
Massive ballooning debt, and you remove any individual motivation to improve one's circumstances and take responsibility for oneself.
But you involve the government as Big Daddy in the sky, because government must now provide for all and sundry.
Yes, and as many on the
And what is that but socialism? But you see, nobody ever takes that step. They get caught up in arguing about the little things. Well, it's going to be like $3 trillion. Doesn't matter. 3 trillion, 30 trillion, doesn't matter. You can't do it because it basically destroys all of the ability of an individual. Sorry about that. All the ability of an individual to do anything about his or her circumstances, and throws them back into dear old Uncle Sugar's lap.
And yet that's where we're going. I mean, Hillary Clinton wanted it. Barack Obama pushed for it in terms of, instituting state-run healthcare, all, state all over everything about healthcare. And you and I have talked about it, and you said, for example, that, Trump is going to have to come up with some socialistic version of healthcare. So I don't see how us laughing at it is going to protect us from it. It seems that they're just continuing to railroad forward with it.
Well, they'll railroad forward with it, but they'll railroad forward with it under entirely different terms. You see, the people who want it socialistically, communistically, whatever you want to call it, they don't care what it costs. They're not talking about the cost involved in it. They just want the fait accompli. Now, Trump, on the other hand, is big on talking about what it costs.
So are we arriving now at the difference between National Socialism and global socialism?
Oh, you suppose.
And as I have long observed, it seems to me that, despite the fact that everyone hisses and rages from over on the National Socialist right, which is really a left, it's like you have the leftists who admit they're leftists and realize they're leftists, and then you have the leftists who say that they're on the right. And I've often said that once you get socialism in place, whether it's national or global, the common denominator is socialism. And so you're prepared to move towards the global version. Now, of course, it's always a receding horizon as a utopian ideology. You never
Why
arrive.
Is that,
There's
Oliver?
always something more that needs to be done.
Why is that?
Because they don't want it to end. It's a way to keep spinning the wheel.
Can it be that they want to include everyone in the world in it?
Of course. But first, it seems that there was...
Of course you say.
Well, that's the idea of globalism. Workers of the world unite. Look at the name, the International.
Well, now that's odd, because it makes you wonder about these refugees, does it not?
Wonder how.
Especially when you import a bunch of them to a high-tech nation like Germany or France or Sweden, and it's going to be years before they're ready to do anything for a living. So they're going to have to exist on social welfare benefits. Oh, I see. For that amount of time. And so you've got these big, ugly dudes full of muscles and full of they want everything from Africa.
And you either give it to them or you
have
violence in the streets. It's much like the old thing of you don't make an anarchist by indoctrinating them in anarchist philosophy. What you do is you get somebody to throw the bomb and then let the rest take care of itself, because they're going to have to justify it. So what you do is you pump them full of these refugees, in quotes, that have come in, and they'll be forced to accommodate them, which means, they can apply the socialist programs and then work out for themselves afterwards why it is that that's what they had to do.
Yes. And they want money. These people do.
Well,
the fact that you don't have a window to...
like Obama said, it works out better for everyone when you spread the wealth around.
It does. It does. Yes, it does. I begin to see how these communists work now. Hmm. So they pull the cork and they let the Syrians roll in, and then behind that pulled cork, through Libya, where Muammar Gaddafi said if he were gone, all of the blacks of North Africa would come streaming through. Huh. Now you've got all of the blacks from North Africa
And sub-Saharan,
streaming
yes.
through. Yeah, sub-Saharan Africa as well. Hmm. My goodness. Oliver, it looks to me as though there's nothing new under the sun.
Well, we have probably 10 minutes left. And remember, we are going to jump over and try to tackle this from a global perspective. And I think hopefully we'll get to do things like talk about the difference in the groups, like the Chinese and Maoist, right? The Russians, the International, the Soros group, the other ones who go for a soft socialism, whether or not they can be divided, and if so, how, and all these other things. But with 10 minutes or so we have remaining, can you kind of summarize a picture for us of what has happened in the U.S., this idea of the commies among us, what they've been up to, what we can expect to see, where they're going?
Well, they've just about brought us to our knees because we do not ask the hard questions. We never ask what happens when you remove these statues, when you remove the ideas, when you start teaching economics that isn't economics. That lovely little lady Cortez, whatever her name is,
Right. Who can't seem to
got a
answer
degree
any
in
question.
economics, as I understand it. And she has absolutely no idea about economics, but she's got a degree in it from a fairly prestigious university, as I understand it. The thing is that no matter what we do, we've got to start asking hard questions, such as, okay, what do you have in its place? If you take this out, what do you put in its place? What do you have? What does it do?
Well, they take out the family because they want to replace the state. They remove the male breadwinner because they want to replace it with the state. They remove religion and charitable organizations because they want to replace it with the state in every case.
And if you do not ask these hard questions and get these mindless answers, then everything else is ridiculous, is it not? Because you have not asked the questions. You do not know what you're getting, so you're fighting about a bunch of nonsense like, should we be civil to everybody that's out there? Should we be civil when we see somebody eating lunch or breakfast?
We got to stop because they might be offended.
Well, I am sorry. This is a safer space. So I will say to you in closing that I am one who asks the hard questions, but then I am known to be a hard man who stays awake at night that you may sleep.